I'm Julie Angieski, and
I'm Ellen Floyd. And welcome, everyone. Thank you. This is so great that you are here. And how many in this room is it your first Indivisible Tacoma event? Oh, great. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, thank you. So we can get started.
so we also want to just say some appreciations. Dave Hackett, who is a member of the church, pays for our rent every month, and we're really, really appreciative of that. And I just want to say thank you also to all of the new leaders. We have a strong steering team, many of whom have been with us for 8-9 years now, and then we have new leaders that have been coming in and joining us and creating new teams this year, and we're just really excited about having those people as well. And we want to also give our gratitude to candidates who are running this year, local candidates. We know that local government is really a really important added protection for us in these times. So we're very excited about the candidates, and we really thank you for coming tonight. So thank you very much. Now we'll have the land acknowledgement.
Hi, my name's Barb Church. My indigenous name is Shwaya from the Stalo Nation. We acknowledge that we are on the stolen land of the Puyallup tribe who has lived here since time immemorial. We acknowledge that the Puyallup and other native nations have been targets of invasion, occupation, and displacement, leading to centuries of trauma. We acknowledge the sovereign rights of the Puyallup and other tribal nations, and we stand in solidarity with their efforts to have these rights honored as part of their work to end generations of trauma. We acknowledge that in this moment of increased display of anti-Native sentiment and racism directed toward Black, Brown, and immigrant communities, that it is imperative that we find common ground to strengthen coalition necessary for the protection of culture, treaty rights, and ultimately for the protection of our lives. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Alessio, and I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, one of our guest speakers this evening, and our keynote speaker. About 10 years ago, shortly after I moved here, I was at a rally in People's Park, and listening to the speeches, and then all of a sudden there was this legislator speaking, and I was just like, wow, just amazing. And I thought to myself, is that what it's like to have legislators here in the state? Because I just moved here from Minnesota, which was, at that time, we were in a really bad Michelle Bachmann district. So anyway, I was just struck by this and very moved and inspired by the speech, and I had to work my way toward her to thank her and congratulate her for all the amazing things that she had pointed out. And of course, that was Laurie Jinkins. She, I'm sure, does not remember that, but I have never forgotten it. And 5 years later, because of her remarkable work, her record in the legislature, her many honors and accolades and awards, she was sworn in not only as the first open lesbian Speaker of the House, but as the first woman Speaker of the House. So please give it up for that. You have to. Baccalaureate degree, master's degree, Juris Doctorate, and special certification from the Harvard School of Government. Speaker Jinkins comes to us and serves us well prepared. She's smart, sharp as a tack, and doesn't miss a beat. She started out litigating on behalf of abused and neglected children and has continued her work without a break to champion anti-discrimination laws, economic justice, and equality and fairness for all groups. She brings high-level skills and broad-based information in her role, which is getting tough legislation, important legislation, through the state legislature. And she does it. She's effective and successful. And she does this in the face of serious oppositional stalling tactics, and particularly in the last couple of years. She has risen to that occasion and doesn't miss a beat and gets the work done. It was a particularly tough year this year, as I'm sure she will tell you, with a new governor in place and with the federal government threatening constantly to cut our funds. With many accomplishments and contributions, too numerous to mention, I'd like to ask you to please help me welcome to the podium Speaker of the House, the Honorable Laurie Jinkins.
And I'm going to sneak in here just a minute because we have an additional surprise tonight that we are very delighted to have, and that is Senator Tawana Nobles from LD 28 is joining us as well. And I don't have as long of an introduction prepared, but I just want to tell you from my own heart, and what I know of Tawana is that she is a person of such high integrity. And I have grown to know her and appreciate her. She is so busy with her public service to all of us. She's on the school board member as well as being a senator. She's working full-time, and she just does so many things. And I can't tell you how lucky we are in the 28th to have Senator Nobles. And when she was elected in 2020, she was the first black senator in 20 years, a decade. So we're just really thrilled to have both of them here.
I'm going to start out. I'm really happy that Senator Nobles was able to join at the last minute tonight. And just so you know, if you look really hard, she's in the background there. She's like an honorary 27th district legislator. So anyway, we love her, the 27th. So I think what we plan to do is we're going to try to go somewhat quickly through last session. But I have a PowerPoint that Senator Trudeau and Representative Fye and I have gone through in a lot of places to kind of ground people in what happened last session. And then I think we'll try to turn toward this next session and what we should or might expect, and hopefully have enough time for questions. I'll just admit that I will stay here and talk with you as long as you want to talk, so somebody's going to have to say, like, hey, time, but move on. Although I might get hungry. So I didn't eat dinner. Senator, do you want to say anything to start off, Senator?
I would love to. Good evening to everyone. As the speaker mentioned, once there's a recap of 2025, we'll jump into 2026 and provide some of our outlook for the next session. And it's really important for you all to know that both of us will have caucus retreats that will help to really firm up what we think will be a 2026 session. Well, for me, Speaker of the House runs things, so she already knows, but my majority leader and the rest of our leadership team will be working together to really firm up things. So we're kind of giving you what we expect for 2026, and as we move closer to session, we'll know for sure what we're heading into.
So I don't think I control the slides, so can I just, whoever does, or do I? Oh, okay. See? She knows everything. Generational difference, you can tell. There's something happening there. Just to give you a picture of last session, we have a long session. Those are the sessions in odd numbered years, like what we're in now, in which we write the budget, the 2-year biennial budget. It's a 105-day session. The session that we're moving into is a very short 60-day session. It's just for a supplemental budget. It's intended to be very kind of compact. It does mean, so I'm going to throw a few things about this next session in. It does mean that any policy bill, any bill that's going to pass has to be pretty cooked before session starts, or it's just not going to make it through a short session. We sent a large number of bills to the governor for signing, but I want to give folks, this group might not care as much about this, but we work in Washington in a very bipartisan way. And we still do. We are not like the other Washington. So when you see that there were 421 bills sent to the governor for signature, 80% of those, 65% of those had at least 80% of the members voting for them. Big super majorities, Republicans and Democrats. And there were, I think about almost 200 of those bills were unanimous. So, we do, and then a lot of bills that aren't unanimous, they go more easily off of the floors because we have worked to take amendments that soften the opposition to them. I couldn't go on any further without saying last year was a very hard year. I began service in the legislature in 2011. That was the Great Recession. I was a freshman during the Great Recession, and so honestly, I was there and I was voting how I needed to vote to help us move forward. It's a little bit different when you're Speaker of the House and you need to figure out how to move forward with a $15 billion deficit. It was by far the most stressful session I've ever had, and you might understand why as we go through this a little bit. Did you want to add anything, Senator Nobles? No. What I'm going to do is go through some big topic areas, and I just don't think it's useful for me to go through all of these bills with you, but I'm going to fly very high and talk about the big areas that we worked on. One of them is housing. Probably the biggest bill that we passed in the housing area was rent stabilization. That created predictability for renters. Like for those of us, how many of you own a home? Here, okay, right? We know what our mortgage payment is going to be basically every year for 30 years mostly. We can plan for that. There are little adjustments that go in with taxes. Renters, they have none of that, none of it. They can't plan for, they don't know what's going to happen. So we put a cap on rent increases, and this was a hard-fought bill for a big number of years. And we're able to finally get it across the finish line this year. And now we'll look and see how that bill is working for people. But we think that this is one of the most helpful things that we could have done, because people losing their rental home because of rent increases is one of the biggest causes of homelessness and people being unhoused in Washington State. So we're hoping to help with that. Just know I'm going to leave this presentation here so you can look at these bills more if you want, or you can ask more about them. Anything you want to add about stabilization or anything on housing?
I mean, I would just also co-sign that rent stabilization was a really important, really controversial bill that I absolutely have supported since we started working on this bill in the legislature. And as we move into this next session and future sessions, like every bill, it may continue to be a topic that we want to continue to fine tune and make sure that the impact is exactly what we want to see in our community. But I definitely feel grateful that we were able to finally pass this bill, even with the difficult conversations that needed to happen in our caucus. So thank you all for those of you who sent emails or came to Olympia to testify and reiterated how important it is for rent stabilization if we want to be serious about housing options for all.
Let's see what the next slide is. I'm just going to say one other thing about housing then. Our focus area as Democrats has been on supportive housing, providing supports for people. supply and expanding supply for housing, and stability and stabilizing people in the homes that they're in. Those have been our three big areas that we've worked in. For those of you who are interested in the supply side, we have a lot of times we have folks in the development community who come to us with ways that they think they can get housing up and built more quickly. In the last 5 years, we've passed no fewer than 25 supply side bills to help with supply. The challenge with supply is it takes a while to build a place. So as those bills really become effective in the building community, I think we'll see more supply come on more quickly, but that's something that we're definitely working on. Next big area that we worked on, which is the only, well, it's not true that it's the only area, but our biggest investment this year in this year's budget was the $2 billion over 4 years that we put into special education and our K-12 education system. That was a big challenge to try and get that money together, and it did mean that was our sole focus area. There's something called MSOC, maintenance, supplies, operations. Some of you may have heard of it. We were able to invest very little money in that, no money into transportation because of the difficult budget situation that we were in. But we felt this obligation that we have been underfunding special education, and we really needed to step up to the plate and do that. So we were able to remove the cap on the percentage of students that are in special ed in any school district. Interestingly, Tacoma School District, this bill didn't actually help them all that much because they had already worked really hard to stay under the cap. They'd already been really, really good in working on special ed things, but across the state, it helped a lot. The other big thing that I'll talk about that we did was to pass a bill that Representative Monica Stonier was the prime sponsor of, which was to promote safe and supportive schools for all kids. So to expand the rights of both children and parents in schools. And also we passed an initiative a year, not last session, but the session before, called the Parents' Bill of Rights. And we thought that there were problems with the initiative. It came to us as an initiative to the legislature, and that we'd have to fix it. And of course, a lot of what we did was trying to fix it. This year, Brian Haywood now is gathering signatures to try to repeal the work that we did on behalf of students here. So we're hoping that they don't get the signatures, but we'll have to struggle with that issue if that's one of the things we may have to see and deal with in the 2026 session. Anything you want to say about education?
I do. I serve as co-chair of Early Learning in K-12 in the Senate and was the sponsor of the MSOC bill in the Senate. And as the speaker mentioned, we did provide additional funding for our school districts. Absolutely not enough. Earlier today, I had an intimate fireside chat with some elected and non-elected leaders from the 28th Legislative District, along with our majority leader. One of those attendees was our superintendent in University Place, and just reiterated, oftentimes with government budgets, we chip away at issues. Meanwhile, it becomes more expensive over the years to even solve the issue. So as we all in this room think about future session, 2026, it's really important that instead of asking for more things that are oftentimes unfunded, or just asking for things that are new, we need to continue to fight for things that don't have significant funding, whether special ed or public school transportation or MSOC. So we'll talk about next session and ways that we can stay focused and stay together and champion things that continue to be underfunded, because 2026 won't be a year for new things. But as the speaker mentioned with the Parents' Bill of Rights, we are working really hard to make sure our schools are safe, to make sure our schools are inclusive, and it feels really good to be a part of a body that is going to stand up against our national administration and stand up for students in Washington State.
Yeah. And that's a big theme you're going to see, I think, in the 2026 session. Next slide is on community safety. I'm just going to talk about one thing that we did, House Bill 2015, which is, folks may remember that the governor was interested in $100 million for law enforcement officers. In the budget situation, that was very challenging. We were able to find the money to do that for one biennium. And then what we did is gave local governments taxing authority to backfill if they wanted to. But right now, the other thing that we did is, you all have heard about the Pierce County Sheriff, correct? Yeah, okay. Challenging person, he was one of the people, it was helpful to see the things that he said and did during session, because what is happening with the $100 million is that counties and cities can engage in a competitive grant process, request money to hire new officers, but in order to be successful in their application, they have to be able to illustrate that they train and use de-escalation techniques, that their use of force policies are the same as what state law requires, and we have a sheriff who is it's the only place in the state of Washington that won't give up hog tying people that are arrested, even though we have a state law against it, that they engage in crisis intervention and trauma-informed care. So the Criminal Justice Training Commission is the one who's receiving those grant applications and then looking to see whether local governments are complying. Essentially what we said is, you got to make a commitment that you're going to comply with state law. And if you won't do that, keep Washington working, then you will not be able to get this money. That makes it hard for us in Pierce County, and it's our sheriff who's making it hard. But this is probably the primary community safety bill we passed. We also passed a permit to purchase bill on firearms, which I think is a big public safety bill. Anything you want to add, Senator?
I was going to mention the require safety training and permits to purchase firearms. We also strengthened protection orders to support survivors of violence and domestic violence, and expanded and strengthened our hate crime laws in Washington state.
Yeah, no, here on the healthcare end, here's where we did things anticipating what the Trump administration was likely to do. So 3 of those 4 things, the 1432 does improve access to mental health and substance use disorder treatment. It's not really in reaction to the federal administration. It's just to make our system more easily to navigate for people. But the other 3 bills, for example, House Bill 1531, our new health department director called me in December. She was born and raised in Louisiana, and her family is still back there. She called me and she said, oh my gosh, public health, like the Louisiana public health officials just had a gag order placed on them. They cannot talk about immunizations to anybody. She's like, we can't do that. Like, we gotta make sure that doesn't happen in Washington. I said, well, that's not gonna happen in Washington, but we already had, we had a rule in place that already prevented that kind of gag order, but we put it in statute this year. So we can thank our new health department director, Chantel Reed, for that. But then when you look down at the Senate bill and the House bill on the bottom, those are both really about us anticipating the Trump administration restricting a woman's right to contraceptives and restricting the rights to hormone therapy. So providing longer prescriptive authority, longer access so people could get up to a 12-month supply. You have to really work with the healthcare providers to do that, because you can't just like give permanent prescriptions, right? They've got to be able to check in with people. So 12 months was as long as we could go, but that was again to make sure that people could get access to the medication that they needed. Anything else you want to say on this one?
Well, I'd like to share, because earlier this month, I attended, or maybe it was last month, all the days are blurring, but I attended an early childhood leadership summit with a delegation from Washington State, DCYF, the governor's office, some nonprofit leaders, and it was really great when we got to a slide that said Washington State. It's great because I got to work on this bill in the Senate, but Washington State has the highest Medicaid reimbursement for doulas across the nation. And it's really important because part of what we all should understand about early childhood education and about preventing violence and preventing some of the decisions that any of us could make any given day in our lives is paying attention to early development, paying attention to maternal health, and making sure that our birthing community has adequate support. And with Medicaid changes, we want to do everything that we can in our state to make sure that we're making access to healthcare accessible, and that we're also helping our providers to be whole as well. And then I just wanted to mention, because it was also important in the work that we did in the legislature, that for pregnant patients, no matter what happens or what changes on a federal level, pregnant patients are guaranteed emergency care access. And because I care about maternal health in our birthing community, making sure that that was solidified was really important.
Yeah. We'll talk about healthcare a little bit more probably. This is going to be one of the sad stories for 2026 for us, unfortunately. Next, on the environment and climate, again, I'm just going to say, go back to something that we've already done, but that you all were part of. First of all, the Climate Commitment Act is, this has created a fund so that we can actually work on climate no matter what happens. We have dedicated dollars to doing that, and the voters of the state, I believe, with the exception of maybe one county, every county in the state of Washington voted to uphold the Climate Commitment Act in this state. So that is part of the most important work that we've done. The other big thing that we did last year was on recycling reform. And so we passed a bill, an EPR bill, to reform our recycling system, make it a little bit more like Oregon's recycling system. And it promises to increase the amount of recycling that we see, decrease the amount of waste that we see, and haulers and producers are going to pay the cost for the things that they produce that cause that waste. So that's a good piece. Kind of an aside on the revenue side, I'm not going to talk about that a little bit, but on the Climate Commitment Act, for those of you who don't know, one of the big things with the Climate Commitment Act is that people businesses that are really good on climate, they create these climate credits that they get by being very environmentally sound. And then they can sell them on a market to companies who are less good on climate, who have to buy them in order to kind of even out the badness that they have, the carbon commitment that they have. But one of the problems we found is that some organizations are hoarding their what did I just call them?
Credits.
Their credits. They're hoarding their credits, waiting for them to get more and more expensive so that they can make more money when they sell them. Well, we thought that, free enterprise, that's okay. You can do that, but you're going to be taxed on them if you hoard them. So we passed a bill that for companies that hoard their credits. It just so happens that we think there's only one company, its name is Tesla, that will be paying $58 million to the state of Washington for hoarding their credits. So there's a tax most people love. There's one person who doesn't, but anyway, he doesn't live here. Anyway, do you want to say anything else about climate? Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about operating budget. I mentioned this at the beginning. By the end of last session, the estimate that we were in a $15 billion deficit. It was driven by three big things. The first was inflationary costs to all of what Washington State does. The second had to do with increases in caseloads, the number of students who are going back to school. We continue to have growth in our schools post-COVID, and caseloads in other areas. That drives up costs for the state. And then the other kind of weird artifact is that for 20 years, the average revenue growth in Washington State per year has been 6.5%. That some years it's been a little bit lower. There's only been 1 year where we have not had any growth. That was 2020, the first year of the pandemic. Every other year we have had a revenue growth over 4.5%. But we statutorily can allow ourselves to presume that we'll grow at 4.5%. Last year we grew at 2%. So that difference, we weren't in a recession. We were still growing. Our revenue was growing. But that difference between presuming 2% growth, or actual 2% growth, and presuming 4.5%, which I don't think was irresponsible based on our 20-year history, created a big gulf in the presumptions of the money that we would have to spend on programs. So that's what drove a lot of that deficit. In the end, the budget focused on our paramount duty, K-12 education, and then we really had to go back to base hierarchy needs: food, shelter, healthcare. Those are the places we added a little bit more money in the food arena, we added a little bit more in the healthcare arena, and we added money in the housing arena. And you'll see in the capital budget, it was amazing what we did. That's a separate budget. But our reductions were really large and dramatic. What we ended up doing is adopting about $9 billion in revenue and $7 billion in cuts in order to get our balance. I guess it's 16 billion. We just thought that a balanced approach was what was necessary. And I can guarantee you that that many taxes and that many reductions has made us basically popular with no one. And I knew that going in, but that's what we did. So I don't know if you want to say anything.
And I'll mention specific numbers for some of our key investments, because even when a speaker says, and I'm co-signing, we did not invest enough for MSOC, materials, supplies and operating costs for schools, we did invest $213 million out the state budget. The speaker mentioned we provided additional investments into food services. We invested $93 million for emergency food assistance, $117 million for local food housing programs, and there was one more, special education, $750 million into special education, and also made sure that we were supporting our state workers and fully funded timely collective bargaining agreements, made sure that there were no furloughs. You all might have been a part of the advocacy when state workers were being, threatened with possible furloughs, and we made sure we could do everything that we could to prevent that. And we do have some reserves also in Washington State, $2.3 billion in total reserves by the end of the 2025-2027 biennium. Now, financials change a lot in the legislature, so it's always good to stay up to date, but also a reserve of $3.6 billion by the end of the 2027-2029 biennium. So lots of good things, even though we did have to make some really difficult cuts. But like any of us in our own households, when we're having to balance or manage our budgets, we have to sometimes cut things. Sometimes for me, it might be like, less hairdos, less nails.
Me too.
I could tell, Speaker.
Mine are like fewer hiking boots.
But just like we do with our personal budgets, governments also have to make cuts that don't feel so good. And for some families, it is less food on the table. Can I pay part of my rent? And honestly, as a parent, I remember those days where it's like, got to partial pay daycare, maybe have to have a sitter for a little bit and pull out of daycare. So it is very challenging to make these decisions, but we can only spend the money that we have unless we increase our revenue.
The big difference is that in Washington State, we have 550 different accounts that we have to figure out how to balance and use. Many of them have very restricted applications and things like that, federal restrictions. So there aren't that many families that have that many accounts. So that makes it, more challenging. The one thing where I'm going to jump ahead to 2026, when Senator Nobles talked about our what we had in reserves, I just want to tell you that I think this is one of the smartest things that we did. And I want to give some credit to Treasurer Mike Pelliciotti. He came in to me immediately after Donald Trump was elected. He's like, he is going to cut off funding for all kinds of things. We have to have the reserves in place to keep things going while we sue him and win. And we will win. Nick Brown has sued him 40 times, and he's on a winning streak with his lawsuits. But there are states that had no reserves to keep programs going while they would engage in a lawsuit, so they didn't engage in lawsuits because what was the point? in a lot of ways. We've been able to do that, and Washington State has been able to lead again, just like Bob Ferguson did when he was AG. So that's a very good thing that we've done. Yeah. Next slide. This just gives you a sense of where the operating budget, in a really big way, where the dollars are spent. People frequently spend a lot of energy on public schools, and you may remember that we've had years where we're over 50%, maybe 52%. The thing is, you have to look at both percentages and dollar amounts. So our budget is bigger than it was. So our overall dollar amount spending on K-12 schools has increased every year. Percentage hasn't increased because we've also spent more on food, spent more on healthcare, spent more on some other things. So it's perfectly valid to look at both of those, but it's probably more valid to look at them both together when you're thinking about, are we meeting our paramount duty?
Which, even though we're working really hard to meet our paramount duty, Washington State, as far as percentage of its budget that goes towards public school education, still ranks in the bottom across the nation. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. I'm very grateful for the work we've done, but we still have work to do.
Next slide, which I think we're going to try to pick up speed. I've been trying, sorry. This is because my seatmate Jake Fye is chair of the House Transportation Committee. So I have always said to Jake, bless you, go forth and do, let me know if you have problems. And he has been an incredible leader there. Now, Senator Nobles serves on the Senate Transportation team, so she might have more to say. I'll, again, just focus on the budget. Problem, the transportation budget was $8 billion out of balance, which is a lot for transportation. So they also took a half and half approach, half revenue, half reduction. The reductions were really basically taking projects that were already in process and making sure we finish them, but not starting new projects until we get the ones that we're in process with done. And not, So I thought that was a smart way to do it. The taxes, there were a number of fees that hadn't been raised for a long time that were increased. The big one that you all probably heard about was a 6% gas tax increase, or 6 cents per gallon gas tax increase. I just want to say that gas tax is a declining revenue source for us. 2018 was the high mark of gas tax in Washington State, and it's been declining ever since. Thank goodness it's really because of efficiency of vehicles and EVs. But Rep. Fye, Chair Fye has, I think, an approach to start looking at some form of, it's not right to call it a road usage charge, but something about how much you're on the road, because that's what causes our roads to deteriorate and causes us to need maintenance and things like that. So trying to get some equity, so it's not all people paying gas tax, and it's not these big fees for people at the very beginning when they just got their electric vehicle. So we'll see that next session. I guess that's a preview of next session, but what do you want to say about that?
I would just add ferries, because I represent Steilacoom and Anderson Island, McNeil Island, Ketron Island. We absolutely invested more in ferries, and we continue funding for 5 new vessels, increased ferry and terminal preservation by $100 million, and $359 million total was invested in ferries and terminals this biennium. So it is a priority for those of you who email and say the ferry is not working, when are we going to upgrade ferries? I appreciate that ferries were important this biennium, this session as well.
Yeah, and for those who want to know what drove the budget imbalance for transportation, inflation in a big sort of way. So when you, like in the construction area, oh my goodness, like we had a number of transportation projects that, in good faith, when DOT did their estimate about how much they would cost and how much we set aside for a project, when we went out for bid, the bids were 70% higher. The average was 30%. So it was much bigger in the a much bigger problem in the transportation budget than in the operating budget, actually. So that was the biggest driver of our transportation challenges. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this. This is 27th District things that Jake did. And then there's a bunch of policy bills also that were passed. On the policy end, speeding has been a huge issue. Senator Nobles' seatmate had a bill to basically have for folks who get DUIs and have to have like a breathalyzer in their car in order to turn on, we can now do that with people who have speeding, who have had issues with speeding and crashes, to keep them at and can regulate the speed of the car within certain measures. We've had a real shortage of state patrol officers, and so we did, Jake was able to get into the budget a longevity bonus to kind of slow down those folks who were retiring from state patrol. Keep them another couple years while we get more folks in. We now have either 3 or 4 different training sites for state patrol officers and all law enforcement officers in the state of Washington. We're training like 300 to 500 people a year at those sites. The classes are full, so don't let people tell you that no one is willing to go into the field. Our classes are all full, but it does take a while to get people trained, especially with the de-escalation kind of standards that we want law enforcement officers to have. And so that's the same for the state patrol. Anything else you want? No. Capital budget. The first thing I just want to say is look at the second line. When I started in the legislature, the big goal, it was a wish beyond wishes that no one thought we could get to, was $150 million into the Housing Trust Fund. And now I'm 15 years in, a record-setting $605 million into the Housing Trust Fund. This is all money that builds affordable, low-income housing, affordable housing, does work on home ownership, all kinds of work like that. Now, the capital budget builds things, okay? So just keep in mind, we don't mix transportation money. Operating budget money does stuff, right? Pays for the community and technical college faculty members and things like that, right? The program operations. The capital budget builds things. And so we've got more money to build housing. We've got more money for infrastructure to local communities. I just want to brag, my other seatmate, Yasmin Trudeau, is the lead budget writer for the capital budget in the Senate. The 27th doesn't do too bad. And the other thing that they were able to do is they also had these really significant inflationary issues in the capital budget, not as high as transportation, but they were able to set aside some money in the capital budget to anticipate that we're going to have people who come back and say, what we thought the original estimate we got was this much. It turns out that now inflation has increased it. Can we have help? And so they've created a fund to be able to help programs with that. We also did a lot on behavioral health in this area.
Hospital in the 28th, I'll mention that part of the behavioral health investment was for completion of the new forensic hospital at Western State and $130 million in grants to expand community-based behavioral health care. Earlier today, I also met with Executive Mello, who reiterated we need to make sure that we have more resources for behavioral health. And so we're well aware that what we've done is not enough, more needs to be done. Also feel proud for the investments that were made. And I'll just mention some education funding from capital budget as well. $702 million was invested for small district and tribal compact schools, $151 million for school seismic safety, and nearly $1 billion for school and early learning construction. And so while I felt sad that we had to slow down things like Fair Starts for Kids, we are still prioritizing early childhood education and finding ways to make investments, even in infrastructure.
We can skip over the next slide. This is 27th District Capital Projects. Questions, I think we'll move into maybe answering our questions and then try and get to yours, or answering the questions that you all sent out, and then get to your questions. I'm sorry we're talking for longer. My apologies. But I think the next question we got asked 4 questions. What do you think about the federal decisions and how can we fight back about those? What do you think will accomplish this next year in session? And what are like new initiatives and things like that? So I'll just say briefly to start, if we were to have session tomorrow, we would have to close a $5.8 billion budget deficit that we're in right now in the operating budget. The capital budget is holding steady and the transportation budget are holding steady. I tell you that to say that we're not going to be in an incredibly better position next session. We're going to have to try to hold our own. But the added problem that we have is a federal government that is incredibly hostile to Washington State. It's incredibly hostile to the people of the United States of America. And there is no state, I just came back from a conference of speakers across the country. There is no state that is going to be able to backfill the Medicaid cuts. No state has the funding to do that. No state in the country. We might have some abilities to do some things here and there, but no state is going to be able to do what that big bill did to us. No state is going to be able to undo that. Our job, I think, next session is to be a solid blue wall against the Trump administration. And doing everything that we can do within that to help Washingtonians in every place we can. The reason I'm giving you such a kind of a dire perspective is to say, I already feel confident we are not going to be able to do everything I want to do. And it's going to be very, very hard. So we're all going to have to pull together. The first thing is, though, to not let him hear and to not let him affect us in any way that we possibly can. So to continue to look at policy bills, like I told you about one policy bill, we also last year in anticipation passed a bill that prohibits the National Guard from other states from being deployed in Washington. The downside with that is we can't, if they are federalized, we can't stop federalized troops from being deployed here. Although I would note that the governor of Oklahoma, a Republican, late last week, said that he did not think that National Guard troops from any other state should be being sent to states. So maybe we'll get some bipartisan support on that. We also tried to take, we're trying to make sure that the detention center closes. And sit down, because I don't know if I should hope that it will or not, you all. Like, I can't tell you, since I've been speaker, this is the 3rd bill that we've passed. Both of the first 2 bills got struck down in court. And we knew that this was the 3rd thing if the other 2 got struck down. So this bill really lets Washington State look at more health and safety things at the detention center, so that if the detention center is not abiding by the health and safety requirements of Washington State, right, they could be closed. I mean, this is more simplistic than it would be, but like a restaurant is closed for food safety concerns, right, and things like that. So that's the goal for that bill. I just talked to the Secretary of Health. They're having a really hard time getting in, as you might imagine. He doesn't really care. He sends a team down there at least once a week to look at everything from water to food to sanitation and things like that. So it's the State Department of Health that really has the authority here. But those were two things that we already did. If we have time, we can talk more about things that I think we might do.
Thank you. We're just answering number one, or did you go through?
I don't know, I'm just answering them all.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
just
okay,
throwing-
good.
I'm
Good,
just
that's
throwing
perfect.
it out there.
That's great. Earlier, when I was speaking, when we were talking about operating budget, I didn't mention the investments that we've made to make sure that we're supporting and protecting our refugee and immigrant communities. And I think that is going to continue to be a priority for Washington State. I'm the chair of Higher Education and Workforce Development. And when I've been meeting with stakeholders about 2026 priorities, I've let them know what I want to prioritize and be focused on is making sure that students have their basic needs met, right? As many of our social programs are under attack, while funding is being removed, while it's being made more difficult to access some of these resources from the federal government, I want to make sure that we're thinking about how are we making sure students have somewhere to live, that they have access to all of their financial resources, that they have basic needs met if they receive SNAP benefits, but that we're protecting those benefits for students. Also, that we're thinking about data protection and other ways that we're protecting students, especially our undocumented and immigrant students. How are we, as we're trying to support them and as we're trying to meet the requirements for information sharing or other ways that we're having to think about collecting data or just being required. Washington State will decide what it wants to do, but the federal government is saying that we need to build certain IT infrastructure so that people can report and show that they're working and show that they're doing this. I mean, to be honest, it's not just for things like SNAP benefits. My daughter gets to benefit from her dad's GI Bill because he was injured in the military, and she now has to report her enrollment every single month. That's not something we had to do her freshman year. So many people are being impacted, and they give you this window of like, you must report it by this time, and as a parent, I want to make sure I'm supporting her because I don't want us to have delays in her financial aid. And so now we got to mark these things in our calendar and make sure we're doing this double dutch so we can be on point so she can continue without interruption in college. So there are multiple ways that the federal government and its reporting mechanisms and making you have to access different databases is making it more difficult. So I want to help and support students just like I want to support my own daughter, making sure that they can access education. In Washington State, we have robust state financial aid. But as you can imagine, even with the governor's FAFSA campaign, so many families are afraid to complete the FAFSA, to complete the WASFA. So how can we continue to increase access to our state financial aid if there is a lot of fear? So during Assembly Days, we're going to have a lot of presentations from some of our higher education stakeholders, including WASAC, some of our labor partners, and talk more about what is changing because of the federal government, but also what we're doing to protect and what we are still offering and what's available for students in Washington State. So be sure to tune in on Assembly Days. I think my committee might be on December 4th, but Assembly Days I think is December 3rd and 4th. Is that right? Maybe.
Well, yours are different than ours.
Oh, that's right. Senate and the House have different Assembly Days.
I don't know.
Other things that I feel like we pass that are beneficial to Washington State that I'm excited about, the community reinvestment program, especially since while not all of the funding is being renewed, there was funding that was renewed, and so I think that's beneficial. I'm excited to see community continue to plug into those resources, and also Covenant Homeownership Program. These programs have been widely successful, and there's lots of data and what do they call them, like websites that display all this data that Commerce is providing to the community. So if you want to know more, make sure that you know more. And as a chair of higher education and workforce development, I do feel it is my responsibility to protect the WIA account. The speaker talked about there being hundreds of accounts in the legislature, and one of them is, I forget the acronym, but Washington Investment and Education account, but it's primarily funded by Amazon and Microsoft and other tech companies to support. We boo hiss, and we do want to continue to hold them accountable. And also, if they're going to do something with the money that they're ripping off of everybody, at least put it towards higher education in Washington State. The thing is, the accounts, especially in difficult times, start to get spent in ways that maybe I feel, Speaker, I've never said this in front of her, so she can text me later. But I feel sometimes the accounts are used in ways that they weren't intended for, as we're having to figure out where we can spend, where we can shift. And so I do want to make sure that with higher education partners, workforce partners, that we're doing everything we can to protect the WIA account so that we have financial aid resources for students. And that was kind of on my list.
So before we take questions, or comments, I'm just gonna run through like a few bills that you're gonna see this session, I think. The No Secret Police Act prohibiting law enforcement from wearing face coverings. The Provider Public Records Act protection, which provides a PRA exemption for any provider or researcher performing reproductive or gender-affirming health care, so to protect those providers. There will be some sort of bills, there may be a series of them or a number of them, to make sure that we're actually protecting the data on Washingtonians that Washington state government has. And you may have seen, I asked the governor to issue an executive order, which I was happy that he did, to basically for his state agencies to really dig in and figure out what is it that we are telling the federal government right now, what are we sharing with them, and then we can figure out how we want to protect that data. There will be a bill that would increase the premium tax on health carriers, i.e. insurance companies, to help provide subsidies for health premiums. So if you paid attention to this federal act, the first thing that's getting cut is subsidies for health premiums. There are 250,000 Washingtonians that are going to be affected by that. So this is a bill that Rep. Parsley is going to work on. And there's also a weird thing in the federal income tax that honestly would allow, we think, state workers' taxes to be held back if the feds are illegally impounding money. And so we'll see. Don't tell anybody. But that's something that Rep. Parsley is also working on. So we'll see, but it's only like federal workers' tax, or excuse me, state workers' taxes. It's a weird thing in the tax code. So those are just some things that you will see from us. Questions, or have we all made you want to go home and go to bed?
If you have questions, would you please go to the center mic?
There we go.
Yep.
You're actually pretty powerful.
So I have that. Okay. Revenue is clearly an issue. Is there any possibility of replacing our very regressive sales tax with the state income tax, which could be much more progressive? I know voters get scared when they hear that because they think additional tax rather than replacement tax. But I know our sales tax makes us one of the more regressive states in terms of taxation.
Yeah. Well, yes, we were the most regressive state in taxation before we passed the capital gains tax. Now we're 49th. But I'm very happy about cap gains because that was my bill. And so anyway, I'm happy. And we passed it the first year I became speaker. We passed it. The answer is yes. We're working on that. It's a complicated situation because in the early 1930s, in a case, the Colton case, the Supreme Court ruled that an income tax was not constitutional in Washington state. So if you want to overcome that court case, you either have to get a 2/3 majority of each the House and the Senate and a vote of the people in favor of an income tax, or you have to figure out a way to get a bill to the Supreme Court and test to see whether or not they think that was a good ruling back in the 30s. I think they don't think that. I think we might be doing some work. But it's, and the other thing I would say is we will not fully replace the sales tax with that. When, I just told you about the imbalance that we have in revenue. But in the end, if we were going to move toward an income tax, we would have to probably do that on an individual basis. I think we should probably start right now with very high income earners who just aren't really, they're just not paying their fair share. So we ought to try to start there. But we also, our business and operations tax, our B&O tax on businesses, taxes every business on its gross income. So if you have a startup business and you're not making money for the first 7 years, but like you could be having gross revenue of $1 bazillion, but your costs for the business are $1.5 billion. You still have to pay taxes on the bazillion. Is that a number? Is that a word? Bazillion? It's a lot. So we need to reform that. We need to reform property tax and sales tax. Eventually, when we get the road to be able to do that, that's the kind of work that we need to get done.
And I want to add, I think what is also exciting to learn about an income tax is 43 other states have an income tax. So unlike the wealth tax, where folks are like, if you pass a wealth tax, I'll just move to a state that doesn't have a wealth tax. Well, if there are 43 other states that have an income tax, it limits you to where you can actually go. So either you stay and pay the income tax, for the small majority that might even consider moving. But I think it keeps, it feels more likely to keep to me, it feels like we would keep a lot more of that revenue here in the state, and could be a really good option. And I'm, excited to continue learning, and excited that the legislature is just having those conversations.
Hi, I'm Donna Knudsen. I'm in your district, District 28, sorry. My concern about the detention center is about safety and fairness for immigrants and our refugee population. But the unintentional consequence of closing the center in Tacoma is where those people are going to go. And we have a very strong support system in Tacoma for those people to get resources and to get on their journey. And it's in the population center where families can come and visit. There's a place for you to stay, because some detention centers across the country are way out in the boonies, 2 hours from the town, where they don't have resources. So there's a bigger question about immigration than closing Tacoma's detention center and what happens to those people. I just want your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is an issue that I have struggled with a fair amount. And a couple of years ago, I actually spent part of my interim really talking to advocacy organizations, talking to families about this. And really the message that I actually got back when talking to everybody that I talked to was that the only way that we're going to get a change to our immigration system is if we shut these detention centers down and we make it an unwelcome place in as many places in the country as we can do. We won't be able to do it everywhere. But when I was like, yeah, but it gives families some access, and they were like, well, one, we don't have access because we start driving up for 3 hours from Oregon, and we get here and everything's been shut down. We don't really get to see our family member. We don't know where they're at. There's nothing good. That's the message that I got, trying to move around and talk to a lot of people. So that's why I kept on working the way that I have been on this. And luckily for Washington State, we are providing incredible services for folks who are undocumented. And we know that right now in the detention center, there are tons of, frankly, documented people that are there just being held because there's just these massive sweeps that are happening. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Diane Tilstra, and I just want to say, Senator Nobles and Speaker Jinkins, I'm very proud of you, and proud to be that you're part of our legislature here in Washington. As a devoted member of public broadcast television station here in KBTC, who's going to be seeing a $1.1 million loss because of the rescission bill, I'm hoping that there is some mechanism within the early childhood education in the state of Washington that might be able to underwrite or support some of the early childhood television programming that's provided by public broadcast for community and for kids in this community. They came in really handy during COVID. They were really busy right then, so I'm hoping that would be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Well, we'll of course be open to KBTC coming and talking to us about that.
Hi, Patty Lippman. I'm from Anderson Island. And I wanted to ask, I'm really, thank you both for the work that you do. I know it's hard, and I appreciate all that you do, Senator Nobles, for the ferry, because that's a really big deal for Anderson Island constituents, so I appreciate that. I really am excited to hear that you're thinking about how to withhold state taxes, or withhold the taxes by state employees to the federal government. I really want to ask, is there any way that we could withhold all of our taxes that are paid in the state to the federal government? Could we structure that in some way at a state level so that we have some leverage against the federal government?
Well, I mean, I would just say that it was only because I have a brilliant chief of staff who loves the tax code that we were able to discover this space that we actually can do with state employees maybe. And it's part of the federal tax code, right? So I think it's unlikely. But that doesn't, once we get into session and once people start looking at something, you get a lot of creative minds that can, come, and sometimes those creative minds really give you an idea about how to transform whatever you're doing and make it bigger, better, different in a way that accomplishes the goal. So I don't have any opposition to it. I don't think the person who's smartest that I know, and I don't know all of you in the room, so some of you in the room may be smarter on this than she is, this was the one thing that she could find.
Well, I encourage you to continue to be open-minded.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm going to write Governor Ferguson about it because I have a friend who's an accountant. She works with government agencies, and she is like, we need to push our governors to do this in blue states.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
And what I will add to the conversation that we shared about the income taxes, we do know that Washington State is going to have to be less reliant on federal funding. And so it does really push folks in the legislature to be really creative about what we can think about as far as revenue, and also ways that we can approach our own budget. But I have heard more people talk about, while it may not be 100% independence from our relationship with the federal government and withholding all, federal or taxes to the federal government, there's a lot more that we can do so that we can feel like we're not being strung along and we can still support Washingtonians with what they need.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you fighting for us.
Thanks.
I know it's a lot of work.
Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Ayana Coleman, and I am a state employee, and your presentation was incredibly insightful. The state budget is what literally is my life at work right now in responding to the state budget, and your presentation made me think of a question. So I used to live here in the 27th district, and 4 years ago I moved to the 25th legislative district for housing as a first-time home purchaser and owner, and that was affordable to me. So thinking about our budget concerns and how we're trying to take care of all of our problems, I love everything we're doing for housing, and your conversation about your colleague Jake Fay and everything he's doing to think about transportation and how we cover transportation costs. And what I am finding in my new community is, for those of us who are going to be working for quite some years, we are on the road a lot, commuting, gas, tolls, HOVs, all of this. And so I'm curious, in all of these conversations that the House and the Senate are having around everyday Washingtonians who are making decisions about quality of life, right? Where we live, we raise our kids, what we can and cannot afford, our jobs, the economy. How are things coming up in these conversations? I commute to Olympia as a state employee. I come to Tacoma quite a bit. This is community, but I can afford living away from those places. And as you all are making those decisions about taxes, revenue generation, if we're becoming less reliant on federal funding, those kinds of things, all these great questions about how we're going to afford being Washingtonians. just any kind of insight you can give to, the working families and parents making these, kitchen table decisions about how we just pay the bills and keep working to take care of our families. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, affordability continues to be a top priority for, I would say, both of the House and Senate Democratic, is it caucuses,
Yep.
Speaker?
Yep,
Okay. I didn't know
caucuses.
if it was cockeye or something.
Sometimes it is cockeye, yeah.
And we just completed a member survey in the Senate to discuss kind of what we hope to see as priorities, and definitely affordability and making sure that Washingtonians feel like Washington State is still a place for them is a top priority for me. And we are thinking about I live in Pierce County, right? So across Pierce County, I have lots of conversations with many of our partners. So when we're thinking about housing, we're also thinking about mobility and transit, and the legislature is making investments in those things, and how the bottom line is, we need to continue to find ways to make living here affordable, and I think we are having those conversations, and I'm excited for our caucus retreat so I can hear some of those innovative ideas and ways that even in 2026 with a budget deficit, we're gonna continue that fight. So stay tuned, but it remains a top priority no matter if you live in a 25th or 27th or 28th or anywhere across Pierce County.
Yeah, it's hard for us to have an effect on inflation, but for example, the consumer protection at the federal level has been gutted. I think you're gonna see some bills taking what the feds should be doing and us doing some more consumer protection work this session also to protect families from, folks who are doing all kinds of things. Nobody calls my house anymore because for some reason the Speaker of the House has decided that when any scammer calls them, she's going to talk on the phone for 20 minutes with them. I don't know why I do that, but anyway, they swear at me in the end and hang up. But it stopped them from calling 2 other people, so I tried. We're going to take one more question and then just a quick wrap up from each of us, I think.
Hi there, 2 of the best here. Followed both of them for a long time. I am a news junkie, former journalist, but even I have trouble keeping up. And my question is whether you have any insight into what they are doing with our voter data. I heard they were requesting it or something, and it's really scary to me to think about that. Although in the state, you don't register by party, but except once a long time ago. Anyway, if you could update us on where that issue is.
I can, so our Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, when the federal government requested personal information and data on the voting records about us, he said, I am happy to provide you with everything that is public information. And he did that. And no further. Now we'll see what they threaten next and what kind of, I think there are some people who are, I think rightfully seeing the conspiracy on this develop, like that this is probably one of the reasons why National Guard troops are being sent to blue states. I don't tend to be conspiratorial, but in this life we're living in, I am a little bit more. So I think the most important thing that we can do is protect the data that Washington has about the people who live here. And there are certain things that we're going to be required to, by law, provide, and that is public, generally public information. But beyond that, we're not likely going to be sharing things voluntarily with the federal government anymore because we now see the things that can happen. Now, there's a whole political landscape behind all of this stuff, and this has to do with like every time every one of us goes on Google and searches, that's another data point that is collected. And honestly, I think at this point in our lives, the right wing has done a much better job at collecting that data and targeting that than the left has done. and that we see the consequences of that. So those are all just, I think, things that we need to all learn about how to protect our own data also. But I don't want to tell you you should not be worried. You should be. But we are going to try and do everything that we can possibly do. And I believe that, you know, what the Secretary of State said was tantamount to saying, I'll see you in court. So, if we can wrap up, do you want to start off, or do you want to?
Sure, I'll start off. The
Okay.
speaker should officially wrap here. So as we think about next year's session, some advice that I want to share is to make sure that with your ask, you remain focused on what we want to see as strong advocates in our community. Keep in mind that with us not being able to invest more money in all the things, a lot of our agencies and school districts are finding it difficult to keep up with just passing legislation that does not come with funding. It's also difficult for them when we're giving some funding but not enough funding, because again, next year the problem will be more expensive. So try to be super focused in your advocacy and work together to have your common agenda. I know that you all have the app. What is the app called?
Take Action Network.
The Take Action Network app, and it sounds like you can receive some help on being focused in the legislation that you're collectively advocating for. And as we move closer to session, again, I'll be more clear on what it is that I'm going to champion, but both of the caucuses will be more clear, and that will give you some guidelines on like where are we headed, so that you all can support what we have decided our priorities in the state. And always still, I mean, you can ask for things, just know that some things members will tell you are going to be a non-starter, right? But I tell folks, even with some of the ECAP cuts, we're not going to stop advocating for ECAP. We're not going to stop advocating for Head Start and early childhood education, even when there have been cuts. So there's some things we want to make sure stay on our radar and stay as a priority. So we're not saying deprioritize, but we are saying be focused and realistic in your ask as we head into session. And the climate is hostile for so many people. So I am inviting folks to practice civility and attack the issues and not each other. Hold each other accountable, by all means. Hold each other accountable. But even as we've seen here in Pierce County, when things don't go our way, there are ways to address really difficult issues and to find ways to respectfully have those conversations. But in order for us to defend Washington against Trump, we have to have a big blue wall, not a fragile blue wall. We have to have a strong blue wall, not a weak blue wall. So work really hard to stick together and be focused, but let's fight like hell to protect our state.
If one of your first things, examples of doing more than you've ever done before is coming to a protest, we will be having No Kings. It's a rally and protest. Yes. We will be in Stewart Heights Park from 1 to 3 p.m. We have over 20 organizations working together with us on this. There will be tabling, there will be music, there will be family-friendly activities for children. Despite what we're hearing coming from the federal government, this is a family-friendly, nonviolent event, not radical terror group. And I don't want anyone to be scared, so please don't be intimidated by anything that they are saying. Don't let them control the narrative. Please come out, join us. It's going to be a really beautiful opportunity for us to come together, and it's going to be really fun. Thank you.
All this that's happening, as you might imagine, Indivisible Tacoma has been growing like crazy. We have lots of new members, lots of new volunteers, new teams, and people here in Pierce County want to work for democracy and justice. We have, of course, huge challenges along with that, and we have bigger expenses. And so we are going to pass baskets tonight because the support we need, we have expenses like our media and online platforms, technology, video support, printing our rack cards, a lot of printing expenses, various costs that have gone up, and we're just a growing, we're very frugal, we're all volunteer, of course, and so if you are, we ask for your financial participation. The baskets, if you're more comfortable not doing the baskets, that's fine. In the foyer are cards that have the QR code on them, so that's the other way you can do it. And please don't feel any pressure if you don't want to contribute at this time. But we are all in this fight together, and so we are thanking you for your support, financial and all the other ways that you're supporting and volunteering. So thank you so, so much.
And now I want to introduce you to two outstanding candidates that weren't in our first candidate forum. The first one is John McCarthy, who is known, I think, across the Pierce County, and he's running for Port Position 1. And let's just say that we want to make sure that people get into these positions who are going to protect us for safety and environmental issues, labor issues, and everything. John McCarthy.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me here. I learned a lot in that last session. I think the only thing separating you from socializing and some snacks are Cyrus and I, so I'm going to take just a couple of minutes. I know many of you. This is a group that I know you study your issues. I know you've read the voter pamphlet. I know you know my background, so I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about it, other than I'm born and raised in Tacoma, about a mile from here. My wife and I first lived in a house 3 blocks from here many years ago, so coming back here is kind of fun. Grew up on the waterfront, worked as a casual longshore worker for 10 years. Was able to put myself through high school, college, and law school. Returned back to Washington State, brought my bride with me. Fortunately, she agreed to come with me from California, and set up a law practice, and became a port commissioner. Served for about 9 years, and then I was appointed to the bench. So I served as a Superior Court and District Court judge, Superior Court for about 18 years. Retired from that. My passion for the port was still intact, and so I was invited if I would be interested in come back and applying some of my skill set and knowledge to the port and serving on the commission, so I returned 8 years ago. But the port is just an incredible place, and it's complicated too. I listened to the speakers talk, and the first thing that came to my mind is, you know, on the global scale, the whole issue of tariffs and what the president's doing with regard to tariffs now is having such an impact of those of us in the port industry. And we have about 43,000 jobs that are created through port activities. And this stop, start, pause tariffs, 100% new tariffs on China, you know, trade has to be fair. We understand that, but this method of going about it is really hurting the industry and hurting those of us in Washington State and our port folks that are involved in trade, because we are the most heavily dependent state as far as trade goes. We're very dependent on that for employment. So my passion is to continue that trade, family wage jobs, but my other passion is to do it safely and do it in an environmentally appropriate manner so we're doing no harm to the conditions and situations that we live in. So I think I'm proudest of some of the work I've done in the last 8 years with regard to environmental issues. You know, when I returned back to the port in 2019, I'm an avid paddler. I was out paddling on the Puget Sound, and I just smelled this stench. It was just incredible. And so I was with a group of dragon boaters. I'm a kayaker, dragon boater, outrigger, canoer. And so let's go find where it came from. And sure enough, it was the rendering plant, Darling, in the tide flats. Knock on the door, you know, nobody's there, even though there's a big sign that says, if you have a problem, you know, contact us. So I was even on the commission at the time. And so I filed a complaint with the Puget Sound Air Quality Control Agency, and that complaint process went on for a while. And they're a tenant of the port. And so their tenancy, their facility burned down, and they wanted to rebuild. Guess what? I'm on the commission now. So I first of all, they promised that they were going to do something that really was going to be environmentally friendly. So another commissioner and I, Commissioner Ang and I, and one of the city council members, we said, take us down, show us the best you've got. We went, we looked at the best that they had, and it's not suitable for what we expect in this community. So fortunately, we were able to send the message to them that even though you have a permit to rebuild your rendering plant, we're not going to extend your lease under the terms that you think. So we're doing some really good things. There's still a lot of work to do. We are creating estuaries with some of the development that we're doing. We have remediated over 1,300 acres of land. There's about 5,000 acres in the tide flat. About half is owned by the port, half by private industry or private individuals or corporations. But we've remediated about 1,300 acres of land. A lot of the port property was contaminated during and after World War II. And as you may recall, we were identified as a Superfund site back about late 70s, actually. And so the port was involved in remediating 4 of the waterways. And I will tell you, we have a great group, an environmental team that is great at remediating land. And so, as I say, we've done about over 1,300 acres. And we're doing it in a way that we can put it back to productive use, put people to work in jobs that are clean and healthy for them and the community. So I'm proud of the work we're doing there. More to be done. There's a lot of property we don't own or in property that we're involved in doing what we can to clean it up. We're involved in litigations because one of our principles is we're going to hold those accountable that made it that way and make them pay. I'm probably, you do. Anyway, lots more to talk about. Happy to talk with you. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it.
And Cyrus Donato running for position 4.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'll be so quick. I'm Cyrus Donato running for position 4. Really a lot of exciting things going on at the port. We have this joint relationship with the Maritime Skills Center that's going to help identify youth that need really high-paying jobs, high-paying careers in the maritime industry. And that's really why I resonated with voters. I'm a frontline port worker. I come from 15 years of maritime experience, from recovering 1.5 million gallons from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to humanitarian missions in the Caribbean. I'm here from this community. You really have deep ties to the port, and so I really understand the role that the port does in supporting the 43,000 jobs for our community. My immigrant grandfather, he died in a really serious industrial accident at the Port of Tacoma in 1973, so that really fuels my commitment to supporting labor unions and workers alike. Presently, I work for an international organization called the International Transport Workers Federation, based in London. It represents 20 million transport workers globally, and really kind of some of the core issues that I focus on is really these exploitation issues in our marine transportation system. So that includes everything from fishermen, the human trafficking of fishermen from Canada to our ports here on the West Coast. It's really insane. These guys have no status. They're forced to remain on these fishing vessels. They have horrific accidents. They get their eyes ripped out. They get their flesh ripped out of their hands. There was just a vessel that exploded last year in Hawaii, and it killed an Indonesian gentleman, and it maimed some other guys where they lost their fingers, they can't speak, and these unscrupulous companies just ship these guys back to Indonesia, to the Philippines, and there's really no federal supervisory oversight, and that's really the tale that I've been telling at the International Labor Organization on the East Coast through various college campuses. But like I said, I've really spent my career both in the U.S. Coast Guard and as a U.S. Coast Guard Reserve officer, maintaining the integrity of our marine transportation system. And I want to continue that as a port commissioner. This is an open seat. I really want to maintain our relationship with the Northwest Seaport Alliance. This is the governing relationship between Seattle and Tacoma, a really unique construct. So we don't compete against each other. It governs our bulk, break bulk, containerized, as well as autos. That's so fundamentally important. Right now, Vancouver, Canada is kicking our butt, and I want to work to develop a strategic plan to address that. We've lost about 20% in containerized cargo in the last 5 years, but a lot of really great work that's been done in the port, really thanks to the port commissioner, Commissioner McCarthy particularly, the relationship with the Puyallup tribe and setting up this new innovative break bulk terminal. Hopefully this can alleviate some of the pressure that we see from tariffs and just really exciting stuff. And yeah, the stress on our supply chains from these on-again, off-again tariffs is really, really devastating to our local economy. I want to work to introduce some cargo diversification. Really exciting. A lot of people don't realize this, but the United States is the breadbasket of the world, and I see it every day at Temco. That's that grain elevator that you look down over from Stadium, and they just pump out soybeans, corn, agricultural products to the Asian markets, and I really want to use my contacts to really grow that cargo volume in a responsible environmental way. Thank you so much for everything you do. Indivisible is so important, and I really appreciate the endorsement that is, when I received that endorsement, to be honest, I cried, because that is really fundamentally the most important. You folks on the doors, protests, really the backbone of our democracy, and I mean, that's why I'm running, is because I am really distressed. I want to hopefully leave this world a better place for my children, and I think there's about 50 years worth of damage that's done in really just a couple of months, and that's why I'm running. So I will turn it over, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Help us elect these two great candidates and all the rest of them. Come and have some cake and socialize together. Thank you so much for coming and for staying.